The film starts with a girl called Julia and her Romanian husband called Francis are in a cab on the way to go to their new house in Romania. While in the cab, the taxi driver compliments her saying she is very beautiful, making Francis feel like a happy guy. They arrive and a landlady opens the door and gives them a small tour before leaving the apartment for the night. Francis lays back looking relieved and the hot couple start getting hot with each other. During the night it rains, causing Julia to stay awake. She gets up and looks out the window where she looks out at the people who live across from them. While looking, she sees a man frantically looking from the flat opposite starting at her. While looking, Francis calls her out and asks for some more blowjob. The next morning, she wakes up and does the choirs while learning Romanian and gets a coffee and has a calm first day. One night she comes back and freaks out thinking a stranger is in her apartment, however it's just the landlady, and just explains she just fixed the light. She waits for Francis to arrive while home alone, however she looks out. She feels like she is being watched, so she turns the lights off and sees a man looking right at through his window. Big hubby arrives and asks what she's doing and says people are watching, but she instead asks how was work instead, and they go out for a walk around the block until they see Popo on the block. They get closer, and while Julia is there, she sees a creep look at her, and so they decide to leave. Next few days later, she looks through the news and they learn the police found a body in a missing girl's apartment, but they brush it off. Juliet goes quiet and explains that there is a man always looking from across and shows the window but brush it across. Later that night, some friends come over for dinner and they talk about the girl who was found dead in her apartment. They talk about it's the 4th killing recently and explain there is a killer about. They make a joke and laugh about it. Julia gets uncomfortable and processed to leave the apartment and goes to take out the trash. While at the stairs, she sees a sexually active. The man kisses and leaves and the women call her out. The woman's name is Irina and introduces herself as her neighbor. The next day she is researching about the killer and watches a video about a survivor, and she explains about how she always felt watched and how she had been followed. This gets her paranoid, so she goes to the movies. While watching, she sees someone sat behind her. This gets her paranoid, so she leaves. She then decides to go shopping, however she notices the same man. She sees the man again and trips up and sees the man watch her again. So she escapes through a back door. Later that night she tells Francis that about what she saw earlier that day, however he decides to forget about the creep following his wife and decides to get his pee-pee wet. He kisses her, but his cringe gives her the ick. Now feeling useless, he suggests to go to the shop and get any CCTV footage. They go to the shop and they ask for the footage and they agree. They show the footage and they see the man following and see how much of a creep he was moving. Instead of calling the police or the husband kicking some ass, he decides to say maybe the man is staring at her because she keeps staring at him. She goes quiet and takes a pic. She then gets paranoid about being watched, keeping her up. While looking out, she hears a knocking on the door. She gets nervous and slowly approaches, shitting her pants. She opens it, and it's the landlady and talking Romanian. While talking, Irina explains she just asking if she had seen her cat, however, she explains she hasn't. They both laugh and talk, and Irina invites her round for a drink. She comes, and they get to know about each other, and we learn Julia moved to Romania with her husband because he got a promotion. Irina then respects how she came all the way here, which must be very stressful for her. Irina's ex bangs on the door, how she tells him to fuck off and shows Julia her gun. They laugh and have a good time, then she arrives home drunk. She lays down, but then we can't forget this is a film, so she gets up and looks outside and sees the man opposite still watching her. She opens her curtains and puts her hand up and doesn't respond, however then her mimics her. Francis comes back, finds his wife depressed, and she explains what happened. He goes to check and doesn't see anything. A cop arrives and questions about her about it, however with the lack evidence, the policeman says let's go to the door and identify him. They go and Francis comes back and says it wasn't him. She starts going mental as she feels like no one believes her, so she goes to sleep. The next day while walking she sees the same man and follows him. She hides and stays on his tail and ends up in a broken-looking building. She goes in and ends up in a hidden strip club where she sees him being a caretaker. He turns his head and she hides. We then see Irina working there and she explains she doesn't know the caretaker. Irina doesn't recognize him and says you're not wrong to be nervous. While at home she spends her time watching stuff and chilling, however gets ready sleep. She notices something is wrong and a man comes from behind and kills her, however she wakes up and notices that it's a dream. She hears a thud coming from Irina's flat. She knocks and hears a scream. She runs to the door and knocks and asks the neighbors for help. However, they look at her like, "Who are you?" They open and go inside. However, they find no one there. The next day, the neighbors complain to Francis, and he explains to Julia that they hate that she is causing a problem. He says he needs to work but promises to go out later. While alone, she hears knocking outside. She finds her ex and says she is missing. She tries to call her number and they hear the phone ring inside. The ex walks off thinking she is ignoring him, however stops him for help. They go to the creeps' flat and explains the situation to ex in the lift. He knocks on the door one time, however there is no answer. He gets a call but is about to leave, however Julia asks him one more time. He bangs on the door and threatens the man just so he can leave her alone and leaves. She goes to the door one more time and knocks, however an old man answers, and she leaves. However, on the way down she sees my man, so she gets in the lift. On her way down, he gives a stare, getting her bone twitching. Later that night, she is at home and Francis calls her to come here. She goes to the door and finds the police with the man who we now learned is called Daniel. The policeman explains he has made a complaint, and so he tells them both to resolve it and keep it moving. They shake hands, however Daniel makes Juliet feel creeped out and leaves. Francis then approaches her and explains they found the killer who was on the loose and is now in prison. Julia goes to the Frantic's work party and his friends talk about the killer being caught. They begin to take the piss in Romanian out of Julia, making her uncomfortable. She then changes her tone and embarrasses him in front of everyone and leaves. She leaves and gets to the train station. She gets on the train and sees a homeless man talking to himself. She then sees Daniel on the train and gets ready to get off. The train, however, does an emergency stop and everyone has to wait until they move again. She sits down and looks away, wetting herself, and then finds Daniel opposite her, explaining why they stopped. She thanks him nervously and he asks him why he is following her. He says, "Let me explain," and says he spends all day looking after his father, and he gets bored, so he goes to the window and looks at people. While talking, she looks at his bag, and it begins to look like a head in a bag, and Daniel explains he wants an apology and says sorry. She gets off terrified and sees him leave on the train. She gets home and gets her bags ready. While packing, she hears music coming from Irina's flat. She goes inside and looks around until she finds Irina's headless body, then boom. She wakes up tied up with Daniel talking to her, so she screams and Daniel shuts her up. She goes quiet and hears Francis call her next door, so she tries to scream, but my man Daniel slits her throat and stops her from getting him sent down for life. Franix comes home and finds her missing with her bags open. Julia tries to go for Irina's gun but passes out. Daniel does some weird stuff but realizes a girl was watching from across. Franix calls Julia and hears her phone go off next door. He comes out and sees Daniel come out from next door. Francis approaches him, however Julia kills him, shooting him 2 times, killing him. Franix sees this and Julia comes out looking not very happy. Thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications for more. We will see you on the next one.